Everything seemed normal, just another ordinary day. But one phone call to the police changed everything. A body was discovered approximately 12 miles away, lying at the base of an embankment near the highway. Whoever had left the body there hadn't made any attempt to conceal it. It was as if the killer had simply driven up, dumped the body, and left without a second thought. The medical examination revealed chilling details about Rebecca's final moments. She had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head, suggesting a brutal attack with a heavy object. But the ultimate cause of death was strangulation. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. In this documentary film, we will examine a real case that happened to Rebecca Gould. She was born on April 28, 1982, in the small, picturesque town of Melbourne, Arkansas. Nestled in the heart of Izard County, Melbourne was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A quiet and close-knit community where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked at night. Rebecca grew up with 3 sisters, forming an inseparable bond with them as they navigated the trials of childhood together. However, their family was shaken when their parents divorced shortly after the youngest sister was born. The separation was difficult for all of them, leaving the girls struggling to adjust to the sudden changes in their lives. Despite the emotional toll, they remained resilient, finding strength in their sisterhood. They stayed with their mother, though their father remained a presence in their lives. Though it took time, the divorce ultimately brought them closer together. They became each other's greatest support system, always watching out for one another, sharing secrets, dreams, and hardships. The Gould sisters were known for their tight-knit relationship, and no matter how challenging life became, they always found a way to laugh together. After finishing high school, Rebecca was determined to further her education. She enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College and moved to Fayetteville, a vibrant city that offered more opportunities than her small hometown. One of her sisters was already studying there, which made the transition easier, and the two saw each other almost every day. Being away from home wasn't always easy, but knowing her sister was close by made everything feel a little less lonely. Rebecca and her sisters frequently visited their family in Melbourne, making the short 25-mile trip whenever they could, though balancing studies and family time was sometimes a challenge. By September 2004, 22-year-old Rebecca was on the cusp of significant change. She had spent the last few months considering transferring to the University of Arkansas, eager to expand her horizons and further her education. Finally, the opportunity presented itself, and she planned to make the switch. However, before beginning a new chapter at a bigger university, she decided to complete one more semester at her current college. It was an exciting yet bittersweet decision, as she would be leaving behind familiar faces and routines. As the start of the semester approached, Rebecca and her sister made plans to return home for the weekend, eager to spend time with their family before their schedules became too hectic again. Rebecca had another reason for heading back to Melbourne. Her boyfriend Casey lived in a nearby town, and she was looking forward to seeing him. Her plan was simple: enjoy some quality time with her family, visit Casey, and then return to college feeling refreshed and ready for the new semester. On Sunday, September 19, Rebecca and her sister drove home, excited for a short break from their studies. They spent the day catching up with loved ones, sharing meals, and laughing over stories. As the evening approached, Rebecca left to visit Casey, who was working that night. She planned to stay at his house and meet up with her sister the following morning to drive back to college together. However, when morning came, Rebecca didn't show up at the agreed-upon time. Her sister tried calling her several times, but each call went unanswered. At first, the family wasn't overly concerned. Rebecca was a young adult, and they figured she might have overslept or gotten caught up in last-minute plans with friends. Maybe she had decided to spend a little extra time with Casey before returning to Fayetteville. But as the hours stretched on without any sign of her, their initial calm turned into unease. If Rebecca had decided to stay another night, she would have at least called or texted someone. The silence was unsettling. By Tuesday, the concern had turned into full-blown panic. Rebecca had not reached out to anyone. Not her sister, not her friends, not even her mother. No one had seen or heard from her in over 24 hours. Her mother, unable to shake the growing sense of dread, contacted the police. Authorities began investigating immediately, retracing Rebecca's last known movements. They discovered that she had indeed stayed with Casey the night before her disappearance. Officers visited Casey at his workplace to question him about what had happened. Casey told police that the last time he saw Rebecca was on Monday morning around 8:30 a.m. when she dropped him off at the cafe where he worked. According to him, Rebecca planned to return to his house, gather her belongings, and then meet up with her sister before heading back to college. He also mentioned that she had promised to pick him up from work later that day, but she never showed. Initially, he had assumed she had gotten busy or changed her plans, but when she failed to appear, he spent the evening with friends at a party, not realizing anything was amiss. Upon hearing Casey's account, the police requested permission to search his home, which he granted. What they found inside was deeply unsettling. Rebecca's car was still parked outside, a red flag in itself. Inside the house, they found her purse, complete with her identification, along with her beloved dog, both things she would never have willingly left behind. Even more troubling, her small suitcase, which Casey said she had packed with some clothes, was missing. As officers continued their search, they noticed something disturbing. The mattress on the bed was bare, and instead of lying flat, it seemed unevenly placed. When they lifted it, they discovered large, ominous red stains that bore a chilling resemblance to blood. As they inspected the rest of the house, more unsettling discoveries emerged. Bloodstains were found on the floor and even smeared on the wallpaper. Inside the washing machine, officers found bedding soaked with blood. Several bottles of bleach were found nearby, indicating that someone had made a hasty attempt to clean up the evidence. The implications were horrifying. Every clue pointed to the worst possible conclusion. Something terrible had happened to Rebecca inside that house, and she might no longer be alive. The absence of her body only deepened the mystery. Though the investigators had not yet found definitive proof linking the blood to Rebecca, it was only a matter of time before DNA analysis would confirm their suspicions. While forensic experts meticulously examined every inch of the house, detectives intensified their interrogation of Rebecca's boyfriend, Casey. Given that he was possibly the last person to see her alive, and that a significant amount of blood had been discovered in his residence, he was a key person of interest in the investigation. However, Casey adamantly denied any involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. According to his statement, the last time he saw her was the previous morning, and she had not contacted him since. He insisted that he had spent the night with friends, returning home briefly to change clothes before heading to work for his next shift. Despite the overwhelming physical evidence, Casey maintained that he had not noticed any blood splatters on the floor or walls and had not smelled bleach. Furthermore, he claimed he did not find it odd that Rebecca's car was still parked outside his house, or that some of her belongings remained in his room. The police, however, were not quick to accept his version of events. Although they had no substantial evidence at that moment to charge him with murder, they were determined to uncover the truth. To verify his alibi, detectives interviewed all of Casey's friends with whom he claimed to have spent Monday night. They corroborated his statement, asserting that he was with them until early the following morning. This provided Casey with a solid alibi, forcing the police to widen their search for other potential suspects. Despite their efforts, they still had no clear picture of what had happened to Rebecca or at what exact moment she had vanished. The only certainty was that she had not answered any calls since the morning of the previous day. During further questioning, Casey suggested that investigators should look into Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, a man named Justin. This tip prompted authorities to reach out to Justin, but he was nowhere to be found and did not respond to phone calls. The coincidence of his sudden unavailability at the same time as Rebecca's disappearance raised red flags. However, 2 days later, Justin resurfaced and contacted the police himself. He explained that he had been out of town at a casino with his father. Investigators were able to confirm his alibi, as surveillance footage and casino records placed him miles away from the crime scene, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. As detectives worked tirelessly to piece together Rebecca's final hours, they uncovered a crucial lead. Surveillance footage and witness accounts revealed that Rebecca had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace on the morning of her disappearance. She purchased a breakfast sandwich before heading toward Casey's house. Employees at the station recognized her from photos, confirming that she had been there sometime after 8:30 a.m. This timeline aligned with Casey's account of events, adding further complexity to the case. Investigators later found the same sandwich in Casey's house, untouched. This indicated that Rebecca had indeed returned home, but something had happened to her before she had the chance to eat. Given that Casey was at work at that time, this cast doubt on his direct involvement. However, authorities could not rule out the possibility that he was involved in some capacity. The investigation took a critical turn when forensic analysis confirmed that the blood found in Casey's house was a match for Rebecca's. Additionally, experts found no traces of foreign DNA in the samples. This only deepened the mystery. If Casey wasn't present when she was attacked, then who was? Detectives expanded their inquiry, questioning all of Rebecca's friends and relatives. They worked on the theory that if Rebecca had been attacked, it was likely someone she knew, someone with a personal motive. Police also scrutinized all of Casey's acquaintances who had access to his home, but this avenue of inquiry yielded no significant leads. For days, investigators faced a frustrating standstill until a breakthrough came on September 27th, 1 week after Rebecca's disappearance. Her body was discovered approximately 12 miles from Casey's house at the base of an embankment near the highway. The location was secluded, not visible from the road, making it unlikely that anyone would have stumbled upon it by chance. Whoever had disposed of the body had not made any effort to conceal it. There was no sign of a shallow grave or any attempt to cover her with debris. The perpetrator had seemingly driven to the location, dumped her, and left. A medical examination revealed harrowing details about Rebecca's final moments. She had sustained multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, but the ultimate cause of death was strangulation. The lack of defensive wounds suggested that she had been taken by surprise, incapacitated before she had a chance to fight back. Experts estimated that her body had been at the site for roughly a week, though they were unable to pinpoint a more precise time of death. While processing the crime scene, investigators identified a potential murder weapon. A piano in Casey's house was missing one of its legs, a thick, solid piece of wood with enough weight to inflict serious injury. The shape of the missing leg matched the pattern of trauma found on Rebecca's skull. When questioned, Casey admitted that the leg had been loose for some time and could have been easily removed. However, the police failed to locate the missing piano leg, despite an extensive search of Casey's house, the surrounding area, and even the location where Rebecca's body was discovered. The complete absence of this potential murder weapon only deepened the mystery. With no physical evidence linking a suspect to the crime, detectives turned their attention toward identifying possible motives that could have led to such a brutal act. One of the first theories detectives ruled out was a robbery gone wrong. Nothing had been stolen from the house. Rebecca's purse, identification, and even her personal belongings were still there. The only missing items were Rebecca's suitcase and the piano leg, neither of which suggested a financial motive. Additionally, the absence of signs of sexual led investigators to believe that this was a targeted killing. Someone had wanted Rebecca dead, and they had acted with enough preparation to minimize the chances of getting caught. Another disturbing possibility arose. Was the perpetrator someone Rebecca knew? Since there were no signs of forced entry, police believed she might have willingly let the killer inside. Given that she was attacked almost immediately after returning to Casey's house, it was possible that the killer had been watching her, aware of her schedule and Casey's absence that morning. Investigators speculated that the murderer had lingered in the house for several hours, attempting to scrub away any evidence using bleach before transporting Rebecca's body to the embankment where it was later found. Despite these working theories, detectives faced a significant roadblock. There was virtually no evidence. Without physical proof, a suspect, or even a strong motive, the case stalled. Over the following months, they expanded their investigation, looking into hundreds of possible suspects, including Casey's friends, Rebecca's acquaintances, and even strangers who lived in nearby towns. Investigators followed countless leads, but none brought them closer to solving the case. They received a flood of tips from locals, yet many of these were based on speculation rather than facts, resulting in dead ends. As time passed, the case grew colder. Several years later, it was reopened multiple times, with new teams of detectives taking a fresh look at the evidence. Yet, every attempt to reignite the investigation resulted in the same frustrating conclusion. Without a clear motive or concrete evidence, identifying the perpetrator remained impossible. The lack of answers surrounding Rebecca's murder eventually captured national attention, drawing in amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts who hoped to piece together the puzzle. One journalist, George Jared, had been following the case since its inception. Passionate about uncovering the truth, he dedicated years to researching the crime, publishing articles, and even writing a book detailing the investigation. As the case gained traction in the true crime community, Jared launched a podcast discussing its many mysteries. During his research, he connected with Jennifer Buchholz, a former counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army who had developed an interest in the case. Recognizing their shared determination, the two decided to collaborate. They created a Facebook group dedicated to discussing Rebecca's murder, where they engaged with thousands of followers who shared theories, analyzed evidence, and debated potential suspects. In the early months of the group's activity, one particular subscriber stood out: William Miller. He piqued their curiosity for two reasons. Firstly, Miller lived in the Philippines, making his deep interest in an unsolved crime from a small town in Arkansas seem unusual. Secondly, he was highly active in discussions, frequently commenting on posts, engaging with other members, and even messaging Jared and Buchholz directly. Miller expressed a strong desire to help solve the case, often suggesting theories and pointing out details that had gone unnoticed by others. He exhibited an extensive knowledge of the crime scene, including obscure information about the area where Rebecca's body was found, details that had never been widely publicized. As time passed, George and Jennifer grew increasingly suspicious of Miller's behavior. They chose to remain discreet about their concerns, carefully monitoring his activity to avoid alarming him. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the group's members, an expert in genealogy, conducted a simple background search on Miller. What she discovered sent shockwaves through the group. Miller was not just a curious outsider, he was Casey's cousin. This revelation raised serious questions. Why had Miller been so invested in this case for years, despite living thousands of miles away? Why had he kept his family connection hidden? Determined to get answers, Jared and Buchholz contacted the police, presenting their suspicions and the new information they had uncovered. Investigators reviewed their findings and were stunned to realize that Miller's name had been in the original case files from 2004. As it turned out, William Miller had been in town around the time of Rebecca's murder. Miller had already been questioned during the initial investigation, stating that he had traveled from Texas to help another relative. He admitted to visiting Casey twice, 2 days before Rebecca's disappearance, and then again the following day. During his second visit, he claimed he hadn't even entered the house. Instead, Rebecca had spotted him standing outside through the window and informed Casey that someone was loitering near the property. Casey stepped outside, spoke with his cousin for about 15 minutes, and then Miller left. At the time, his presence had not raised any suspicion, but now, with new evidence coming to light, detectives were taking a much deeper interest in him. As they dug deeper into Miller's background, they uncovered a troubling history. He had been a suspect in multiple cases over the years, including an assault charge in 2002 involving a minor. Later, he was arrested for breaking into his ex-wife's home and attacking her. Despite the severity of these crimes, Miller never faced serious legal consequences. Eventually, he relocated to the Philippines, where he started a new life. Marrying, having children, and working on offshore oil rigs. Detectives were eager to question him again, but with Miller living overseas, bringing him in was nearly impossible. He was also unresponsive to attempts at contact. The police had no choice but to wait for him to return to the United States. This finally happened in 2020 when customs officials notified authorities that Miller had re-entered the country and traveled to Oregon, where his mother lived. Detectives called his mother in an attempt to locate him, but she claimed she had not seen her son in a long time. However, detectives knew she was lying. Miller was in town, and they needed to act fast. Realizing that they had no direct evidence linking him to the crime, the police formulated a strategy. If Miller was indeed involved in Rebecca's murder, they needed to find a way to extract a confession. Detective Mike McNeil, who was leading the investigation, took a calculated approach. Instead of immediately confronting Miller with accusations, he casually explained that they were conducting follow-up interviews with everyone involved in the case. Miller, appearing cooperative, agreed to speak and insisted he had nothing to hide. Then McNeil suggested something unexpected. He asked Miller if he would be willing to take a polygraph test. Surprisingly, Miller agreed. He then traveled back to Arkansas for what he thought would be a routine follow-up. Upon arrival, Detective McNeil pretended to call the local police chief, inquiring whether a polygraph specialist happened to be available. Miller, unaware that this was part of a strategy, immediately became visibly nervous and attempted to steer the conversation in another direction. Meanwhile, the detective continued the charade, stepping away as if making arrangements. A few moments later, he returned and informed Miller that, by pure luck, a polygraph expert could arrive in just 30 minutes. In reality, the specialist was already waiting in the next room. Although polygraphs remain a subject of intense debate and are widely regarded as unreliable, their results deemed inadmissible in court, the detectives had no real interest in the test itself. Their true objective was psychological. They wanted to unsettle Miller, to push him into a state of heightened anxiety where his carefully constructed composure might begin to fracture. By subjecting him to the test, they sought to exploit his nerves, to make him question his own ability to keep his secrets buried. Miller, visibly uneasy, hesitated before reluctantly asking whether polygraph results could be used as concrete evidence against him in court. Detective McNeil, sensing the opportunity, responded ambiguously, crafting his words carefully to maintain an air of authority without outright lying. "In some cases, they can be," he said, deliberately avoiding mention of how infrequent or insignificant such cases were. His evasiveness had the desired effect. Miller's apprehension deepened. Though uncertainty gripped him, he ultimately consented to take the test, unable to find a way to refuse without raising further suspicion. As expected, Miller failed spectacularly. The polygraph examiner, following standard protocol, concluded that Miller had been deceptive in answering all critical questions, particularly those concerning his connection to Rebecca's murder. His responses betrayed him, his body's involuntary reactions exposing the guilt he had tried so hard to suppress. The detectives had been waiting for this moment. Watching Miller's anxiety spike, McNeil pressed forward without hesitation. His voice calm but firm, he delivered the next blow. Forensic analysts, he claimed, had recently re-examined evidence from the original investigation and had discovered traces of Rebecca's DNA in samples taken from Miller's car. In reality, no such forensic findings existed. The police had never collected or tested any DNA from Miller's vehicle back in 2004. It was a calculated deception, a legal but ethically dubious interrogation tactic designed to push a suspect over the edge. Miller's reaction was instantaneous. His expression changed, his breath hitched, and a wave of panic flickered across his face. He sat motionless for several seconds, his mind racing through the implications. McNeil seized the advantage, driving the point home with relentless insistence. "We have the proof," he said with certainty. "You're caught. The only thing left for you to do is tell the truth." The psychological weight of the moment was crushing. Miller's defenses, already battered by the interrogation, began to crumble. His fingers twitched against the metal armrests of his chair. His knee bounced erratically. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, before he finally spoke, but not with an outright confession. Instead, he grasped at a desperate, implausible story. "I didn't kill her," he blurted out. His voice was shaky but determined, clinging to a sliver of hope that the detectives might believe him. "I swear. That morning I went to Casey's house, and when I walked in, she was already dead. There was someone else there, some guy wearing a mask. He must have done it." McNeil didn't buy it for a second. His stare bore into Miller, unblinking, his silence heavy with accusation. Then, something unexpected happened. Miller inhaled sharply, then held his breath. His fingers clenched into fists before slowly relaxing. He looked directly at McNeil, his eyes dark and unreadable. Another beat of silence passed, stretching into an eternity, before he finally exhaled and uttered the words the detectives had been waiting for. "I'm just going to tell you. I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." According to Miller, that morning, he had set out on a hunting trip in the dense woods near his cousin Casey's house. He was familiar with the terrain, having spent years in the area during his school days. However, as he roamed the forest, a thought suddenly struck him. Casey's girlfriend Rebecca was at the house. For reasons he could not fully explain, he felt an urge to speak with her. It was an inexplicable compulsion that soon escalated into something far more sinister. Miller knocked on the door, fabricating a pretext to enter. He told Rebecca that he needed to use the phone, and she, unsuspecting of any ill intent, let him in without hesitation. While pretending to make a call, Miller began pacing the living room, his mind racing. Meanwhile, Rebecca had returned to the bedroom, unaware of the violent thoughts boiling beneath the surface of Miller's seemingly calm demeanor. He later claimed that he was suddenly overwhelmed by a violent, uncontrollable rage. A dark impulse took hold of him, an irrepressible need to kill. Spotting a piano leg nearby, he seized it without a second thought and made his way toward the bedroom. Rebecca was lying on the bed, oblivious to the imminent danger. In an instant, he swung the heavy wooden object down upon her head, striking her multiple times with brutal force. When she stopped moving, Miller, in a final act of calculated cruelty, wrapped his hands around her throat and strangled her until he was certain she was dead. Once the heinous act was complete, Miller wasted no time. He wrapped Rebecca's lifeless body in a bedsheet, carried her outside, and placed her in the back of his pickup truck. Determined to erase any evidence of the crime, he scoured the house, frantically scrubbing the floor, walls, and bedding with bleach in an attempt to eliminate the bloodstains. After cleaning as much as he could, Miller drove to the highway and found a secluded embankment. Under the cover of darkness, he disposed of the body, leaving it to decay beneath the trees, hidden from passing motorists. Following his confession, the detective pressed Miller for a motive. What could have driven him to commit such a senseless murder? Miller's response was chilling. He claimed he had simply felt the overwhelming urge to kill Rebecca, with no logical reason or provocation. He insisted that he could not control himself, that the impulse had consumed him entirely. However, at the conclusion of the interrogation, he expressed remorse, stating that he had lived with guilt for years and now had to take responsibility for his actions. Miller was promptly arrested and extradited to Arkansas, where the case was to be prosecuted. But, in an unexpected twist, once he arrived, he abruptly retracted his confession and claimed he was innocent. This sudden reversal threatened to unravel the entire case. As by law, a confession needed to be made in front of a judge, particularly in situations where there was no physical evidence linking the suspect to the crime. Complicating matters further was a procedural error during Miller's arrest. The officer responsible for reading him his rights had been interrupted by Miller's questions, resulting in the Miranda warning being left incomplete. This technicality could have rendered his confession inadmissible in court, potentially setting him free. However, the judge ruled that the recorded confession would still be considered valid. Miller's opportunity to commit the crime, his intimate knowledge of Casey's work schedule, and his detailed account, which matched the crime scene perfectly, were deemed sufficient evidence to proceed. It is also worth noting that Miller had an easy route to escape justice. When police first contacted him in Oregon for questioning, he could have refused to cooperate and simply walked out of the station. Given that there was no concrete evidence against him, he could have easily boarded a flight back to the Philippines, permanently avoiding extradition. Without tangible proof, authorities would have had no legal means to bring him back, and the case would have gone unsolved forever. But Detective McNeil had a strong suspicion that Miller had an underlying desire to confess. His obsessive engagement in the online true crime group, where he frequently commented and interacted with investigators, strongly suggested that he wanted to be noticed. If Miller had truly wanted to keep his involvement hidden, the logical course of action would have been to stay silent and avoid drawing attention to himself. Instead, he had actively inserted himself into discussions about the case, a behavior often observed in individuals who subconsciously want their crimes to be uncovered. Perhaps his decision to remain in the interrogation room without requesting a lawyer was part of this same internal struggle. He simply could not continue living under the weight of his guilt. Eventually, despite his brief attempt to retract his confession, Miller changed his mind yet again. He ultimately struck a plea deal with the prosecution, bringing some form of closure to the case. However, what followed next sent shockwaves through the investigation. While serving time behind bars, Miller made a horrifying revelation. Rebecca was not his only victim. In a chilling admission, he confessed to murdering 5 other women throughout his life. The most disturbing part? He could not even remember their names. According to his new account, he would lure women into his car, drive them to remote locations, and kill them without hesitation. He further revealed that he selected his victims based on appearance, specifically targeting young, slim, and short women with light hair. Detectives immediately recognized the significance of this description. Rebecca had fit his preferred victim profile perfectly. This new information led investigators to reconsider the nature of her murder. Had she been targeted specifically because she matched Miller's preferred type? If Miller was indeed a serial killer, this would explain why he had chosen to kill his cousin's girlfriend without any discernible motive. The act was not personal. It was simply another in a long pattern of horrific crimes. With this confession, law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions reopened cold cases in an attempt to link Miller to other unsolved murders. While the extent of his crimes remains uncertain, one fact is clear. Rebecca's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger, far more sinister pattern. Given that Miller had spent 25 years working on offshore oil rigs, his job had taken him across multiple states and even international locations. This transient lifestyle meant that he had the opportunity to commit numerous crimes without attracting much suspicion. If his confessions about additional murders were true, it would suggest that his violent tendencies had been present for decades, and Rebecca was just one of many victims. However, as of now, law enforcement officials have not yet found concrete evidence to support these claims, leaving many questions unanswered. Investigators continue to comb through old case files, re-examining unsolved murders that match Miller's pattern and victim type, hoping to uncover links that might bring justice to other families. In 2022, after a lengthy legal process, William Miller was officially sentenced to 40 years in prison for his confession to Rebecca's murder.